Revenge. It's a concept that seems to be popular in our world today. We have movies about the guy who gets revenge on his enemies, and it spawns 4 sequels. We look at TV shows that are named about getting revenge on these people that have wronged you. It's almost a ride. If somebody's done something wrong to you, well, you're going to get back at them. But is this a biblical concept? As Christians, how should we view revenge? How should we view how we treat other people? Today we're going to look at a passage of Scripture where Jesus tells us a little bit about our attitudes towards others when they've done us wrong, and it might surprise us what Jesus has said.
You're watching Timeless Talks, timeless subjects, information for life.
We understand the golden rule, do to others as we'd have them do to you, but what if there was something as an ungolden rule? Maybe do to others worse than they do to you. Jesus is talking about the idea of revenge, retaliation, and the number of movies that are out there that come to mind about individuals that take vengeance into their own hands and seek to murder people because of what they have done to them. And yet, is that really what Jesus wants us to do?
I think about years ago, was it the Untouchables, where they had the scene of the Chicago way, was, you put one of ours in the hospital, we'll put one of yours in the morgue. And that really is the standard. And what's interesting is when Jesus talks about this in Matthew chapter 5, he says, I've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And we've seen in this series, he sets this standard. Here's what the world has said, here's what you said. Now, when we hear eye for an eye and tooth for tooth, we think of, fight against one another. But it was actually a revolutionary concept when it came in the old law, because it limited revenge. Because in the ancient world, somebody did something wrong to you, you destroyed them, right? You went and completely. And the old law standard was, well, you just give back to them what they gave to you. And it was this idea of limited punishment. But the problem with that is when you try to repay back what they've done to you, it never equals out. It never balances. And I think that's the heart of what Jesus is getting at here.
I think about this idea of eye for eye, tooth for a tooth. Most people have heard of the Hatfield-McCoy feud, where those individuals, they eventually got to the point where they didn't even know why they were trying to take vengeance or retaliation on each other. And yet they kept on going at it because they never knew when to stop. And that's really the idea of what Jesus gets at there when that eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But he goes on and says, but I tell you not to resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on their right cheek, well, give the other to him also. And so is this the idea that, we should just take what we get and keep on going?
I think that's sometimes the mistaken place we jump to is, we can't defend ourselves. We can't stand up for ourselves. But that's not the context Jesus is talking about here. He's not talking about protection. He's talking about revenge. And in the sense there is, if somebody has done something to you, you may want to say, well, I am justified in doing whatever to them. And he says, no, you let it go. You move on. You don't look at the slight and keep you from doing something else. As later he would talk about it, they sue you and take your shirt, give them your coat also. It's almost as if, we'd have that if somebody, sued us and took something from us and then we saw them in need, we'd be like, well, I'm not doing anything for them. They were wrong. And he's like, no, you do the thing that should be done because it's the right thing to do, not because of who they are.
And, when you think about the idea, we have ways by which we can settle things in a nice way, in a proper way. We have our judicial system. If someone has actually wronged you, if that's what Jesus says, if someone's suing you. So, but the idea, though, is when we come down to the idea of retaliation, we are not to take the law into our own hands, because we do have a court of law, so that they can exact vengeance for God, and ultimately God is the one who can ultimately produce all vengeance or give all vengeance.
I've seen a couple of times in some recent things that have happened in our world where a person has chosen a higher road. I saw one where a person whose family member had been killed, the person who in the sentencing phase said, I want to forgive this person. You see it, somebody was wrongly accused of a crime, and the person said, I just want to drop the matter, and it was a difficult situation, I want to move on. And the public's reaction has been, well, they shouldn't do that. That person deserves to be punished. And almost as if looking at that person saying, you're doing something wrong because you're not going after them. And I think that's telling to where our mentality has changed from a biblical perspective. Because what Jesus is saying here is you do the right thing. You go beyond.
Yes.
And, that's what he talks about, that going 1 mile. Of course, that was a literal thing in that day when the Roman soldiers could press you to carry their baggage for a mile. And nobody liked it, but Jesus is saying instead of seeing it as an opportunity to, do the minimum you have to do and then throw it in their face, he says, do a little more. Take the high road, in essence. Take that extra thing. And I think that's so important because we're losing that in our society, and then we're wondering why we're so angry and so frustrated and why it seems there is no hope of redemption for people, because when they do something wrong, we just want to punish them. Mm-hmm. There is no forgiveness, and there needs to be forgiveness because we all do wrong.
Absolutely. And, when he talks about that idea of compels you to go 1 mile, that idea is of impressment into service. I mean, so that first mile was a have to mile. They have to do this. The second mile, though, when he says go with him too, that's you get to do that. And so it's that moment that the idea of if someone is forcing you to do something against what you would want to do, well, you do that, but then you do give them more, and you set yourself to the side, recognizing that you're not the most important, that there are others, that people need forgiveness, that people need you to help them. And that's why Jesus in Matthew 7 would stress, do to others as you would have them do to you.
And it goes to this matter of when we get to the point of what is the least I have to do. Mm-hmm. What is the minimum I have to do? And that's where an eye for an eye is. This is what I can get away with. Jesus doesn't want us to have that attitude. He doesn't want us to be people to think of what's the least I have to do, what is my bare minimum I have to follow. He wants us to have that higher standard, to be more like God. And that's in essence what he's saying here is, we see it as it transitions later, become more like God, and God is forgiving. God is the one who doesn't give us what we deserve. If we got the punishment we deserve from God, we wouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. And so we need to understand that that's how we need to treat others. This society of just cancel people, write them off, that may make us feel good, but it doesn't benefit us as a whole. And I think that's why it's so important that we have the right mindset when it comes to forgiveness.
And, there towards the end, Jesus says, give to him who asked you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. Really, that's how we should be as individuals, not trying to figure out how we can get back at someone or how we could retaliate or if they did something mad or evil to us. That's not how we should respond, but rather we want to respond for their good. And we want to do those things which are beneficial to them. In fact, you imagine if Jesus had that mindset of retaliation. I mean, after all, anybody that has ever lived, he was the one who had the opportunity to do that. And so he could have retaliated when he was on the cross. Even before that point, he could have said, you know what, I'm going to wipe them all out. And he could have done so.
There's an old saying that says, for the person who seeks revenge, he needs to dig 2 graves, one for the person he seeks revenge against and one for himself. Because in essence, when you're seeking revenge, you may be harming another person, but you're harming yourself. And you're harming yourself because you're not becoming more like God. You're not doing it. And so that's why I think we need to look at this. Our tendency is they did me wrong, they deserve this. But we also need to say, someone did me wrong, but I'm not going to allow it to destroy my heart and my soul and the way that I need to be. Thank you so much for joining us today and looking at these verses. We're glad that you did. We got some other resources that you can look at. Click on the links before to find out some more things about this topic. We'd love to hear from you. We have a couple of ways to contact us. You can use the phone number that you see on the screen. You can text us or call us. We'd love to hear from you. Go to our contacts page and fill out that information. If you'd like to hear a topic that you'd like to hear us discuss or would like to hear us discuss more about these things, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for being with us today, and God bless.